arise to oppose this motion, and I've just heard the Minister for Transport describe administrative motions as being supporting some inane or arcane process to suggest that a gag is somehow acceptable. It's only this Labor government in the history of the Queensland Parliament that has had a standing gag that has limited debate across the parliamentary sitting week. Now, the Transport Minister might think that's good practice. We think it's lazy practice, and in fact, it's a government that is afraid of scrutiny. It is a government that is so arrogant that they think that to listen to dissenting voices is an inconvenience. Well, we have been elected by the people of Queensland too. We've been elected to come into this parliament and speak on their behalf. And the Labor ministers may not like it, but our people have a right to be heard as well. So let's talk about this gag motion that we're debating and we're opposing. It puts a gag on the Revenue Legislation Amendment Bill and allows for only an hour and a half for this broken Labor promise to be properly scrutinised. And this is a broken Labor promise where they are introducing new taxes and increased taxes. And one of the things about this lazy Labor government is they don't like to allow time not only for debate but for consideration in detail. Consideration in detail where you can actually ask questions about clauses and ministers have to answer. And I can tell members of this House, that if you were to look at what's happened since this standing gag, this guillotine motion has been repeatedly put in place, there are very little consideration in detail, very little opportunity to ask ministers questions about specific clauses in bills. What we've seen happen as a result, ministers who aren't across their brief, who never get asked the questions because the time is shut down by these sorts of motions, and then inevitably we see a few months later, sometimes only I see the Minister for Industrial Relations on the other side and Minister for Race and come back in and have to amend it because they've mucked it up. It has not only caused a lazy government who is intolerant of different voices, it has resulted in ministers who are not across their brief and has resulted in legislation which is not only poorly drafted but is put into this House without the opportunity for ministers to explain, clause by clause, what it means. And there is a lot of detail just in this bill, just in this Revenue Legislation Amendment Bill. But as my colleague, the member for Glasshouse and Leader of Opposition Business also alluded to, there's the issue of the appropriation. Now, all members will get an opportunity to speak in regard to the budget component, but the issue of the estimates and also the limitations on being able to speak and to ask questions in estimates has really become quite ridiculous. So we're going to have 30 minutes to consider what the program that's been put together by the government and being asked to support that timeframes that they suggest for those various portfolios. But what we've seen happen within the estimates process has been an abuse where chairs, Labor chairs, have allowed the running down of the clock and legitimate questions being asked of ministers, and it's been an abuse. The arrogance of this government has no bounds.
Order. Members to my right.
The arrogance of this government has no bounds. We want to hold this government to account, but they don't want to answer the questions. They don't want to be open to scrutiny, open to transparency of the people, and they hate coming into parliament. They hate listening to voices that dissent from their own. But I just want to pick up on something that the Treasurer said earlier, because it's relevant to this debate about this motion, where he tried to defend the indefensible about misleading people about the increase in new taxes that this Labor government bring in. He said there wouldn't be any. It wouldn't be any. And now he says, oh, well, businesses should have known. They campaigned against us.
Speaker.
So either this is...
Member from Eastern, would you please take your seat? Minister, what's your point of order?
The honourable member is no longer speaking to the procedural motion. She is now on substantive issues that are extraneous to this debate. And I ask for you to make a ruling.
Thank you, Minister. I've been listening closely. I believe I've afforded a degree of latitude to both sides, but I would ask you, Member from Maroochydore, to be mindful of the motion being debated.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This motion talks about the Revenue Legislation Amendment Bill, which the Treasurer tried to claim It wasn't a broken promise. And then went on to basically outline why he was introducing revenge taxes for businesses that didn't agree with him. This is an extraordinary government. It can't handle dissenting voices, so it gags them in this parliament. It doesn't like dissenting voices in the community, so not only do they tell deliberate mistruths to them about increased taxes, they then get revengeful. No wonder public servants are worried for their jobs when they're bullied by this government and their revenge culture.